What would you do if you discovered that the place where you spend your evenings hides a secret that makes your blood run cold? In 1873, the Saloon, near Tombstone, Arizona, became famous for more than just whiskey and poker. It was run by two charismatic sisters known for attracting miners and drifters with their beauty and charm. Behind the laughter and liquor, visitors began to disappear. Years later, human remains were discovered in a dry well behind the saloon. Locals believed the sisters were poisoning drinks, hunting wealthy men to rob and dispose of them. The sisters vanished before the authorities could act, leaving behind only rumors and a trail of bones. If you enjoy dark stories from the past, subscribe to the channel to avoid missing new investigations. Doctor of Archaeology David Reynolds never imagined his research into abandoned settlements of the Wild West would lead to one of the most disturbing discoveries in Arizona's history. In March 2023, he arrived in the old Tombstone area to study the remains of 19th-century settlements. The desert air was dry and dusty. The wind carried the scent of sagebrush and old wood. The sun was scorching, but it was this heat that helped preserve many artifacts of that era. Reynolds worked with a team of 5, using metal detectors and ground-penetrating radar to search for hidden structures. On the third day of research, the device detected an anomaly in the ground behind the ruins of what was once the saloon. The structure seemed too regular to be a natural formation. The ground in this place was looser, as if it had once been dug up. When the team began excavating, the first thing they found was stone masonry. It formed a circle about 2 meters in diameter. As they dug deeper, it became clear that it was an old well. But what was strange was that the well was too far from the main building of the saloon. Usually, wells were dug as close as possible to residential premises for convenience. At a depth of 3 meters, Reynolds' shovel hit something hard. It was neither stone masonry nor a tree root. Carefully clearing the find, the archaeologist saw a human skull. The condition of the bones indicated that they had been lying here for decades, possibly over a century. But this was only the first skull. Further excavations showed that the well was literally filled with human remains. The local sheriff arrived on the scene an hour after Reynolds' call. After examining the find, he immediately contacted the county coroner and the Arizona Historical Society. News of the mass grave spread quickly among local residents, many of whom claimed their ancestors had told strange stories about this place. Researching archival documents in the Tombstone Library provided the first clues. The saloon was called the Silver Horseshoe and belonged to 2 sisters, Isabella and Violetta Hartwell. According to tax records, the sisters purchased the land in May 1872. They built the saloon in an incredibly short time, just 3 months. Senior librarian Margaret O'Connor, who has studied the history of the region for over 30 years, provided additional information. According to her, the Hartwell sisters were unusual for their time. They came to Arizona without husbands, which was extremely rare in that era. Both looked significantly younger than their documented ages. Isabella, the older sister, was a tall blonde with piercing blue eyes. Witnesses described her as incredibly charming, capable of captivating any man in a few minutes of conversation. Violetta, the younger sister, had dark hair and brown eyes. She was more reserved, but no less attractive. Both sisters spoke several languages fluently, which was surprising for women from a small saloon town. The Silver Horseshoe quickly became a popular spot among miners, traders, and travelers. The sisters served high-quality alcohol. The food was delicious, and the service was excellent. But the biggest advantage of the establishment was the presence of the hostesses themselves. Men came not only to drink, but also to spend time in the company of the charming sisters. The first suspicious cases began in the fall of 1873. Thomas McGregor, a wealthy cattle trader from Texas, stopped in Tombstone for a few days. He spent 2 evenings at the Hartwell sisters' saloon, obviously enjoying Isabella's company. On the 3rd day, he disappeared. His horse and wagon remained at the inn, but McGregor himself seemed to vanish into thin air. The sheriff at the time, James Collins, conducted a superficial investigation. According to his report, McGregor could have left on foot or on someone else's horse on urgent business. The Hartwell sisters claimed that the traitor had left the saloon around midnight in an obviously intoxicated state. They suggested that he might have gotten lost in the desert or fallen victim to robbers. A month later, another visitor disappeared, William Stanford, a young banker from California. He was traveling with a large sum of money to open a bank branch in Tombstone. He was last seen at the Silver Horseshoe Saloon in the company of Violetta Hartwell. In the morning, his hotel room was empty, and the money had disappeared with him. What they discovered next was not recorded in any official report. Locals began whispering about a curse that haunted wealthy men who visited the sisters' saloon, but no one dared to voice suspicion aloud. The Hartwell sisters were too influential and respected in the community. In the winter of 1873, the number of disappearances increased. For more people went missing, all wealthy and all last seen at the Silver Horseshoe. The pattern was the same. A man spent the evening at the saloon. One of the sisters paid special attention to him, and in the morning, he disappeared without a trace. Dr. Edward Black, the local physician, was the first to suspect something was wrong. In his diary, discovered by historians in the 1980s, he wrote about the strange symptoms he noticed in visitors to the saloon. Men complained of sudden weakness, dizziness, and confusion after consuming alcoholic beverages at the sisters' establishment. Black suspected poisoning but could not identify the poison. He conducted several analyses of alcohol samples from the saloon but found nothing suspicious. He later suggested that the sisters used some rare plant from the local flora, possibly brought by them from another region. In a note from December 23, 1873, Dr. Black wrote, "I am increasingly convinced that the Hartwell sisters are connected to the disappearances. Their behavior is becoming increasingly strange. Isabella avoids direct eye contact when I mention the missing men. Violetta seems nervous, constantly glancing towards the back of the saloon, but no one dared to say it out loud." The sisters enjoyed the protection of several influential people in the city, including the mayor and the chief sheriff of the county. There were rumors that Isabella had a romantic relationship with the mayor, and Violetta was close to the county judge. In the spring of 1874, the situation reached a critical point. The disappeared wealthy miner, Robert Davis, was the son of an influential politician from Washington. When the father arrived in Tombstone to search for his son, local authorities were forced to conduct a serious investigation. Federal Marshal John Thompson arrived in the city in April 1874. He was an experienced investigator with no ties to local corruption. Thompson began by interviewing witnesses and examining the circumstances of each disappearance. What he discovered next would change everything. The marshal noticed one detail that previous investigators had ignored. All the missing men had significant sums of money or valuables with them. Thompson suggested that the disappearances were not accidental. He also noticed that the Hartwell sisters lived significantly better than the income from the saloon allowed. Their clothes were expensive. They wore high-quality jewelry, and their home was furnished with luxurious furniture. At the same time, the saloon was not profitable enough to provide such a standard of living. Marshal Thompson decided to conduct covert surveillance of the saloon. He dressed as a merchant and rented a room at the inn across from the Silver Horseshoe. For a week, he observed the behavior of the sisters and their visitors. However, there was one detail that no one dared to mention. Several locals had seen the sisters carrying heavy sacks out of the saloon late at night. They loaded them onto a wagon and drove off in the direction of the desert. In the morning, they returned with an empty wagon and a strangely cheerful mood. Old Mexican woman, Concepcion Rodriguez, who lived in a shack near the saloon, told the marshal what she had never told anyone before. According to her, she had several times heard screams and groans coming from the basement of the saloon late at night. The sounds were so creepy that she was afraid to leave the house after sunset. Rodriguez also mentioned a strange, Swedish smell that sometimes came from the saloon. She described it as a mixture of rotting meat and some kind of chemicals. The smell was especially strong after rain, when humidity raised the aromas from the ground. Marshal Thompson realized that he needed material evidence. He could not arrest the sisters based only on rumors and suspicions. It was necessary to find the bodies of the missing men or other evidence confirming their involvement in the crimes. On the night of April 27, 1874, the marshal decided to search the area behind the saloon. He took 2 assistants and several shovels with him. They began by inspecting an old well, which seemed abandoned. In the light of the lanterns, the marshal noticed that the ground around the well was unnaturally loose. Vegetation here grew thicker and greener than in other parts of the desert. This was a classic sign of burial of organic materials. When they started digging, the first human remains were found at a depth of just 1 meter. The skull belonged to an adult man. Nearby lay fragments of expensive clothing and a gold watch. The watch was engraved with the inscription, "To Thomas McGregor from a loving wife." Further excavations revealed a horrifying picture. The well was filled with human remains. The marshal and his assistants extracted the bones of at least 12 men. Many skeletons were incomplete. Some skulls had traces of blunt trauma. Among the remains were found personal belongings of the missing men: rings, watches, coins, documents. All this confirmed the identities of the victims. These were the very men who disappeared after visiting the Silver Horseshoe Saloon. But the most horrifying find was a diary wrapped in oiled cloth. The handwriting belonged to Isabella Hartwell. In the notes, she described in detail the methods of murder and the motives for the crimes. The sisters used poison from the seeds of the datura plant, which they grew in a secret garden behind the saloon. What they discovered next was not included in any official reports. The diary contained information that the sisters were not new to murder. They had practiced their methods in several other cities before arriving in Tombstone. Isabella wrote about previous hunting grounds in Texas and New Mexico. According to the records, the sisters had developed a complex system for selecting victims. They chose lonely men with money who had no close ties to the city. These were usually travelers, traders, or gold prospectors who would not stay in Tombstone for long. The murder process was well established. One of the sisters lured the victim into a separate room where she served a poisoned drink. The poison did not work immediately. The man lost consciousness gradually. Then the sisters carried the helpless victim to the basement of the saloon, where they finished him off with a heavy hammer. After the murder, they searched the body, taking money and valuables. The corpse was dismembered to make it easier to transport. The body parts were taken into the desert on a wagon and dumped into an old well. Blood and internal organs were buried in the garden where datura was grown. The most shocking detail was that the sisters sometimes kept trophies from their victims. The diary mentioned a collection of teeth, fingers, and other body parts that they kept in a wooden box. Isabella wrote that these items helped them remember each hunt. However, there was another detail that no one dared to mention aloud. The diary contained hints that the sisters did not act alone. They had accomplices in other cities, possibly an entire network of people, who helped them find victims and avoid suspicion. Marshal Thompson realized that he did not have enough time for a full investigation. News of the discovery of a mass grave spread quickly through the city, and the Hartwell sisters realized that they had been exposed. He needed to act quickly to arrest the criminals before they escaped. On the morning of April 28th, the marshal and a group of assistants headed to the Silver Horseshoe Saloon. The building was empty. The windows were shuttered. The front door was unlocked, which was strange for such a cautious establishment. Inside the saloon, there was chaos. Tables and chairs were overturned, bottles broken, papers scattered on the floor. The sisters had clearly left the building in a hurry, not having time to take all their valuables. Gold coins and expensive jewelry remained on the bar. In the basement, the marshal discovered an improvised torture chamber. The walls were splattered with dried blood. Bloody rags and tools lay on the floor. In the corner stood large wooden barrels, presumably used to dissolve bodies in acid. The most horrifying find was the very wooden box mentioned in the diary. Inside, the marshal discovered a collection of human teeth, fingers, and other body parts preserved in alcohol. Each trophy was neatly signed with the victim's name and date of murder. The search for the Hartwell sisters began immediately. The marshal sent out descriptions of the criminals to all nearby towns and settlements. A reward of $1,000 was offered for information on their whereabouts. But the sisters seemed to vanish into thin air. They were last seen at the train station in Tucson, where they boarded a train to California. The conductor remembered two elegantly dressed women who bought tickets to San Francisco. They introduced themselves as widows traveling to visit relatives. The trail of the Hartwell sisters was lost in San Francisco. Some witnesses claimed to have seen them at the port, where they boarded a ship to Europe. Others said the women headed to Mexico. Officially, the sisters were never found. However, this discovery was only the beginning. The investigation revealed that the crimes of the Hartwell sisters were part of a much larger operation. Analysis of their correspondence revealed connections with criminal groups in several states. The letters mentioned partners in Denver, Dallas, and New Orleans. These were people who helped the sisters find wealthy, lonely men and provided information about their financial situation. In exchange for this assistance, the sisters shared part of the loot. Federal authorities began an investigation across the country. In Denver, a woman named Rosa McClintock was arrested, who ran a brothel and supplied information to the Hartwell sisters. Letters from Isabella with detailed descriptions of the methods of murder were found at her home. In Dallas, police discovered another mass grave behind an abandoned brothel. The remains belonged to 8 men. All were killed in a similar way. The owner of the establishment, Mary Thompson, admitted that she received instructions from the Hartwell sisters by mail. The investigation in New Orleans led to the arrest of a poison dealer, Pierre Lafitte. He was found to have recipes for making deadly concentrates from datura seeds and other plants. Lafitte admitted that he had supplied poisons to several women, including the Hartwell sisters. But there was another detail that no one dared to mention. The sisters' documents contained plans to expand the operation to the West Coast. They were going to open a network of saloons and brothels from Seattle to San Diego, using the same method of attracting and killing wealthy clients. The total number of victims of the network, led by the Hartwell sisters, was never accurately established. Officially, 37 murders in 4 states were confirmed, but experts believe that the real number of victims could reach hundreds of people. The Silver Horseshoe Saloon was demolished by order of the authorities in May 1874. The well with the remains of the victims was filled in, and a memorial cross was erected. Locals long avoided this place, considering it cursed. The story of the Hartwell sisters became a legend of the Wild West. Newspapers wrote about them, ballads were composed, stories were told around campfires, but most people preferred to consider this story a fiction, too terrible to be true. Not everything was discovered before this find. In 1922, workers building a new road near the site of the former saloon came across another burial. It was a small cave in which lay the remains of 5 women and 3 children. Forensic examination showed that these people were killed around the same time as the victims from the well. All the women had traces of violent death, and the children were apparently poisoned. Among the remains were found personal belongings indicating that these were the wives and children of some of the murdered men. This discovery gave rise to new, horrifying theories about the activities of the Hartwell sisters. Perhaps they killed not only wealthy men but also their families to eliminate the possibility of revenge or investigation. This turned them from greedy murderers into real monsters, sparing not even children. In the 1930s, an elderly Mexican man, José Garcia, told journalists a story that he had heard from his grandfather. According to him, the Hartwell sisters practiced some strange rituals with parts of the bodies of their victims. They believed that this would bring them good luck and protect them from retribution. Garcia claimed that his grandfather had witnessed one of these rituals. Deep at night, he saw the sisters dancing around a fire behind the saloon, holding human skulls in their hands. They sang in an unknown language and threw various herbs and organs into the fire. These testimonies were never documented, but they added a mystical element to the story of the Hartwell sisters. Some researchers have suggested that the women may have practiced voodoo or other forms of dark magic, which they studied in New Orleans. In the 1950s, historian Eleanor Finch conducted extensive research in the archives of several states, trying to find traces of the Hartwell sisters after their escape from Arizona. She managed to discover several interesting facts. In the San Francisco police archives, she found a report of 2 women matching the description of the sisters who were seen at the port in May 1874. They boarded the French ship Bellefleur bound for Marseilles. In the French archives, Finch discovered mention of 2 American women who arrived in Marseilles in June of the same year. They introduced themselves as Isabelle and Violette Cordier, widows of French colonists from Louisiana. The women rented a house in a wealthy area of the city and lived a secluded life. However, after 6 months, they disappeared as suddenly as they had appeared. The landlord found the dwelling empty, and all the valuable items in the interior were gone. Neighbors recalled that in recent weeks, a strange smell had emanated from the house, reminiscent of the smell of rotting meat. But the most interesting discovery Finch made was in the archives of the Paris police. In the spring of 1875, a series of mysterious deaths occurred in Paris among wealthy bachelors. The victims died in their homes under suspicious circumstances, and their money and valuables disappeared. All the deceased had visited the elite salon The Pearl, run by 2 beautiful American women. The salon was located in the fashionable Saint-Germain district and attracted wealthy men with its refined atmosphere and charm of the hostesses. According to witnesses, the women were strikingly reminiscent of the Hartwell sisters. The French police began an investigation only after the 5th death. By that time, the Americans had already disappeared, leaving behind only expensive furniture and some fake documents. Examination showed that all the victims had been poisoned with a plant poison of unknown origin. Finch traced the further path of the suspects through Europe. Similar crimes occurred in London, Vienna, and Berlin in subsequent years. Everywhere there were 2 American sisters who opened expensive salons or brothels, attracted wealthy clients, and then disappeared. After a series of mysterious deaths, the trail of the sisters is finally lost in Berlin in the winter of 1878. After that, similar crimes in Europe were no longer recorded. Some researchers suggest that the women died or were killed by competitors. Others believe that they changed their methods and became more cautious. An interesting theory was put forward in the 1960s by criminologist Robert Chase. After studying all available materials about the Hartwell sisters, he suggested that they were not ordinary criminals but representatives of a secret society of female killers. According to Chase, similar organizations existed in several countries in the 19th century. Their members specialized in the murder of wealthy men and had a wide network of informants and accomplices. The goal was not only enrichment but also a kind of revenge on male society for the oppression of women. This theory explained the professionalism of the sisters, their extensive connections, and their ability to disappear without a trace. Perhaps they received help from other members of the organization who provided them with new documents, safe routes, and places to hide. Chase also drew attention to the symbolic elements in the actions of the sisters: the collection of body parts of victims, ritual elements in the murders, the choice of certain types of victims. All this pointed to an ideological background to the crimes that went beyond simple greed. However, there was something even more disturbing that did not appear in official reports. In the 1970s, private detective Michael O'Brien investigated a series of disappearances of wealthy widowers in California. The circumstances were strikingly similar to the cases of the Hartwell sisters. All the victims were last seen in the company of 2 elegant elderly women who introduced themselves as European aristocrats. The women ran a private club for wealthy gentlemen in San Francisco. After the disappearance of another victim, they closed the establishment and disappeared. O'Brien managed to find a photograph of the suspects and showed it to an expert in historical documents. The specialist stated that one of the women was strikingly reminiscent of Isabella Hartwell, only 100 years older. But this was impossible in terms of human life expectancy. The detective suggested that it could be the descendants of the Hartwell sisters who continued the family business. Perhaps they passed on the methods of murder and criminal connections from generation to generation, creating a dynasty of female killers. This version was further confirmed in the 1980s, when the FBI investigated the activities of a group of women specializing in the murders of wealthy men on the West Coast. The criminals used plant-based poisons and methods strikingly reminiscent of the Hartwell sisters' style. FBI agent Janet Connor, who led the investigation, discovered an old diary in French at the home of one of the suspects. Examination showed that the handwriting belonged to Violetta Hartwell. The diary contained instructions on making poisons and methods for selecting victims. The most shocking find was a photograph showing a group of women of different ages. The inscription on the back read, "Family, 1912. Several faces in the photograph bore a striking resemblance to the Hartwell sisters. Connor suggested that the sisters created not just a criminal group, but a real clan whose members were related by blood or marriage. They may have had children from their victims or accomplices, raising a new generation of killers. Until recently, this discovery remained the last in the chain of mysteries associated with the Hartwell sisters. But the discovery of archaeologist Reynolds in 2023 opened a new chapter in this dark story. Analysis of the remains from the well showed that some of the victims were killed significantly later than 1874. Radiocarbon dating of the bones revealed that the last murders could have occurred in the early 20th century. This meant that someone continued to use the well as a burial site for decades after the disappearance of the sisters. Among the items found were objects belonging to a later period: a pocket watch from 1905, coins from the early 20th century, remnants of clothing of modern, for that time, cut. All this indicated that the tradition of murders in this place was not interrupted. Local historians began to study records about the owners of the land after the demolition of the saloon. It turned out that the land had changed hands several times, but it always belonged to women. Many of them were single or widows, which was unusual for that time. One of the owners was Maria Delgado, a Mexican woman who acquired the land in 1892. Neighbors described her as a beautiful and mysterious woman who rarely appeared during the day. She built a small house on the site of the former saloon and lived as a recluse. Delgado disappeared in 1910 under suspicious circumstances. Her house was found empty, but in perfect order, as if the owner planned to return. In the basement, traces of blood and chemicals were discovered, but the police didn't consider them significant. The next owner was Rosa Castillo, who bought the property in 1911. She was also a middle-aged, single woman who avoided contact with her neighbors. Castillo lived there until 1927, when she suddenly sold the house and left in an unknown direction. Interestingly, during Castillo's ownership, several mysterious disappearances of wealthy men occurred in the area. They were all bachelors or widowers and had significant sums of money with them. They were last seen in the bars and restaurants of Tombstone, but no one remembered who they were associating with. What they discovered next completely changed their understanding of the scale of the crimes. Reynolds' team expanded the excavations and discovered a hidden room under Castillo's house. It was a well-equipped laboratory for making poisons, with stocks of various chemicals and dried plants. Diagrams of the human body, marked with points for inflicting lethal blows, hung on the walls of the laboratory. Cabinets contained vials with unknown liquids, many of which, according to experts, contained potent poisons. The most horrifying find was an album with photographs of men. Under each photograph was a date and a brief note in Spanish. The notes contained information about the financial status of the people pictured and the methods of their murders. It was a kind of trophy collection of a modern killer. The album contained more than 50 photographs, covering the period from 1895 to 1925. This meant that the crimes in the former saloon continued for more than 30 years after the disappearance of the original Hartwell sisters. Handwriting analysis showed that the notes were made by different people. Some notes were in Spanish, others in French, and still others in broken English. This confirmed the theory that a group of women of different nationalities, united by common criminal goals, was operating there. However, there was one detail that no one dared to say out loud until now. Deep in the laboratory, archaeologists discovered an altar decorated with human skulls and bones. Nearby lay strange amulets and symbols characteristic of the practices of black magic and Satanism. This discovery completely changed the understanding of the motives for the crimes. Perhaps the murders were committed not only for money, but also for ritual purposes. The women may have believed that killing men gave them magical power or protection from retribution. Religious historian, Professor Daniel White, who studied the symbols found, stated that they corresponded to the practices of secret sex prevalent in Mexico and the Caribbean in the 19th century. These groups worshipped dark deities and practiced human sacrifice. White suggested that the Hartwell sisters may have been not just criminals, but priestesses of such a sect. Their methods of murder, the collecting of body parts, the ritual elements, all of this pointed to a religious motive for the crimes. This theory explained the phenomenal resilience of the criminal organization. If the murders had a religious character, then the tradition could be passed down from generation to generation as a sacred ritual. Each new priestess continued the work of her predecessors, following ancient rites. Modern descendants of the residents of Tombstone reacted to these discoveries with great concern. Many families discovered that their ancestors may have been victims of a mysterious sect. Some residents even left the city, fearing a curse that might hang over the place. The mayor of Tombstone, James Rodriguez, tried to reassure the population, stating that all the crimes remained in the past and posed no threat to modern residents. However, his words did not convince many locals, especially after a series of strange incidents that began shortly after the excavations. Several residents of the city reported hearing female voices at night coming from the site of the former saloon. The voices sang in an unknown language and beckoned men to approach. Some claimed to have seen ghostly figures of women dancing around the filled-in well. The local priest, Father Martinez, performed a rite of consecration of the burial site, but the strange phenomena continued. Moreover, several men from the town told of seeing dreams in which beautiful women lured them to the old well. Psychologist Sarah Johnson, who specializes in mass psychoses, suggested that the residents of Tombstone were experiencing a collective psychological trauma from the shocking discoveries. In her opinion, rumors of ghosts and curses are an attempt by the subconscious to cope with the terrifying reality of the past. However, there were fewer skeptics after the incident with a tourist from Phoenix, Michael Brandon. The 37-year-old businessman came to Tombstone to see the excavation site. In the evening, he disappeared from his motel, leaving all his personal belongings and money in the room. The search for Brandon lasted a week, but to no avail. His car was found parked near the site of the former saloon. There were no signs of a struggle in the car. The keys were in the driver's seat. It seemed that the man had simply gotten out of the car and disappeared. The only clue was the testimony of the night watchman of the construction site, who claimed to have seen Brandon around midnight in the company of two women. The guard described them as very beautiful and elegantly dressed, but he could not make out their faces because of the darkness. Police are treating Brandon's disappearance as an accident or suicide. The official version is that the man could have gotten lost in the desert and died of dehydration. However, many locals believe that it is connected with the curse of the Hartwell sisters. That discovery changed the whole understanding of this case. A month after Brandon's disappearance, workers deepening the well excavations discovered fresh human remains. Examination showed that the bones had been in the ground for no more than a year, which made it impossible to link them to historical crimes. Next to the remains, Brandon's personal belongings were found: driver's license, credit cards, gold watch. This confirmed that the missing tourist had become the latest victim of a mysterious series of murders that has been going on for more than 150 years. The most shocking discovery was a note found in the pocket of Brandon's clothes. The text was written in English, in a woman's handwriting. "Welcome to the family, Mr. Brandon. Your sacrifice will help us achieve eternal youth. The Hartwell sisters are alive and continue their work." This document completely changed the nature of the investigation. The FBI took control of the case, classifying it as a serial murder with a possible connection to the occult. Agents began to study all modern disappearances of men within a radius of 100 miles of Tombstone. It turned out that over the past 10 years, 23 men had disappeared in the region. They were all wealthy, single, or divorced. Many disappeared in circumstances similar to Brandon's case. Abandoned cars, untouched personal belongings, no signs of a struggle. FBI profiler Catherine Hayes suggested that the modern criminals are descendants or followers of the original Hartwell sisters. They could have adopted not only the methods of murder, but also the philosophy of the criminal organization. According to Hayes, the group uses Tombstone as a kind of sacred land, where it lures victims for ritual killings. The site of the former saloon has special significance for them as a source of magical power or a connection with the spirits of their predecessors. The investigation revealed that several new residents had appeared in Tombstone in recent years, leading reclusive lives. They were all attractive middle-aged women who had no visible sources of income, but lived in affluence. One of the suspects was Isabel Marina, a Mexican woman who bought a house near the excavation site 2 years ago. Neighbors described her as a very beautiful and mysterious woman who received guests only at night. Several witnesses claimed to have seen expensive cars with men behind the wheel near her house. When FBI agents arrived with a search warrant, Marina's house was empty. The woman had disappeared without a trace. Traces of blood were found in the basement and chemicals used to dissolve organic tissue. The most disturbing find was a modern version of a murder diary found in Marina's bedroom. It contained photographs and personal information about 20 men, including Michael Brandon. Next to each photograph were dates and brief notes about the methods of murder. The diary also contained the addresses of other women in various states, presumably members of the same organization. The FBI began a coordinated operation to catch them, but most of the suspects disappeared before the agents arrived. The only one arrested was in New Mexico. Carla Sanchez, a 40-year-old woman of Spanish origin, ran a small bar in a deserted town. During a search of her house, poisons, tools for dismembering bodies, and a collection of men's personal belongings were found. Sanchez confessed to participating in a religious sect that practices the ritual murder of men. According to her, the organization has existed for more than 100 years and passes on traditions from mothers to daughters. The goal is to achieve immortality through the absorption of male life force. According to Sanchez, the original Hartwell sisters did not die, but gained eternal youth through their rituals. They still lead the sect from a secret refuge, possibly located somewhere in Mexico or South America. These statements seemed fantastical, even to experienced FBI agents. However, some facts made one wonder. For example, the methods of murder used by modern criminals exactly matched the notes from Isabella Hartwell's diary found 150 years ago. Moreover, DNA analysis found at the scene of modern crimes showed a genetic link to hair discovered in the house of the original sisters. This could indicate that the modern killers are indeed descendants of Isabella and Violetta Hartwell. However, there was another detail that no one dared to talk about publicly. Several witnesses who saw the suspected women claimed that they looked strikingly young for their documented age. Some described them as girls in their 20s and 30s, although the documents indicated 40 to 50. This anomaly gave rise to the wildest theories among the local population. Some believed that the Hartwell sisters had indeed gained immortality and were still continuing their bloody activities. Others suggested that it was a matter of plastic surgery and hormone therapy. The scientific community rejected mystical explanations, but could not give a rational interpretation to all the oddities of the case. Too many coincidences, too accurate reproduction of historical methods, too organized activity for an ordinary criminal group. The investigation continues to this day, but most of the suspects remain at large. They disappeared as suddenly as the original Hartwell sisters once did, as if dissolving into thin air. The only result of the operation was the arrest of Carla Sanchez, who refuses to testify about the whereabouts of her accomplices. Tombstone today lives under the shadow of its dark past. Tourists still come to see the excavation site, but many locals avoid the area, especially after sunset. It is said that sometimes you can still hear female laughter and see ghostly figures dancing in the moonlight. State authorities have established round-the-clock security at the site of the former saloon, but this has not reassured local residents. Many families have left the city, not wanting to live in a place that may be cursed. Property prices have fallen sharply, and the tourism business has declined. The story of the Hartwell sisters has become the subject of study by criminologists, historians, and psychologists around the world. This is one of the few cases where a criminal organization has successfully operated for more than 100 years, without losing its core characteristics and methods of operation. Some researchers compare the sisters to mafia clans or terrorist organizations that pass on traditions from generation to generation. Others see them as a unique case of female criminality, motivated not only by greed, but also by ideological beliefs. Religious leaders of various faiths condemned the activities of the sect as a manifestation of Satanism and called on believers to pray for the purification of the defiled land. The Catholic Church even sent special exorcists to conduct a ritual of expelling evil spirits from Tombstone. However, the most disturbing aspect of the whole story remains the fact that most of the modern members of the organization are still at large. They can operate anywhere in the country, continuing their bloody activities under new names and in new places. The FBI warns single, wealthy men to be cautious when meeting unfamiliar women, especially in bars and clubs in remote towns. Signs of danger may include excessive attention to financial status, attempts to find out information about family ties, and persistent invitations to secluded places. As for Tombstone itself, the future of this city remains uncertain. Local authorities are trying to turn the dark history into a tourist attraction, but many residents consider this blasphemy against the memory of the victims. Archaeologist David Reynolds, whose discovery triggered the whole chain of events, still receives threats from unknown individuals. He is advised to stop the research and leave the region. Reynolds refuses, arguing that science should shed light on all the mysteries of the past, no matter how dark they may be. However, even he admits that some aspects of the case remain unexplained from a scientific point of view. Too many strange coincidences, too accurate historical parallels, too organized activity of the modern group. Perhaps the true truth about the Hartwell sisters will never be fully revealed. Perhaps some secrets should remain buried in the Arizona desert along with the bones of their victims. But one thing is certain. The story of the Wild West turned out to be much darker and bloodier than we could have imagined. And somewhere there, perhaps in a remote town or in the shadows of a night bar, beautiful strangers are still looking for their next victim. The epilogue of this story has not been written, because it continues. Just a few months ago in Nevada, another wealthy businessman disappeared, Robert Stevens, the owner of a casino chain. He was last seen in a bar in a small town, where he was negotiating the purchase of land. Witnesses claim that he spent the evening in the company of two beautiful women who introduced themselves as realtors. Stevens' car was found on the side of a deserted road. There were no signs of a struggle in the car, but his watch, wallet, and cell phone were missing. In the back seat, police found a withered datura flower and a note with one line, "The family is growing." Las Vegas detective Michael Carroll, who was investigating this disappearance, contacted the FBI after learning about the Hartwell sisters' case. According to him, the methods of the suspects are strikingly similar to historical cases. The same luring scheme, the same victims, the same mysterious disappearances. Carroll turned to databases in other states and discovered a disturbing pattern. Over the past year, 17 similar disappearances have been registered in Colorado, Utah, New Mexico, and Texas. All the victims were wealthy middle-aged men. All disappeared after meeting unfamiliar women. The most frightening thing is that the geography of these crimes forms a perfect circle with its center in Tombstone, as if someone is methodically expanding the hunting zone, using the site of the former saloon as a starting point. This may mean that the organization has not only survived, but has also significantly expanded its activities. FBI psychologist Dr. Elizabeth Thorne suggests that modern members of the sect may be using the internet and social networks to search for victims. Wealthy, single men often flaunt their wealth on social media, making them easy targets for professional predators. Thorne also notes that the methods of the sect have evolved with the development of technology. If earlier the sisters relied on random encounters in saloons, now their followers can study potential victims in advance, plan meetings, and prepare alibis. However, the basic principles remain unchanged. Beauty as bait, poison as a weapon, ritual as meaning. This suggests that the organization has retained its ideological basis despite all the changes in society and technology. FBI agent James Hunter, who coordinates the interstate investigation, acknowledges that they are dealing with one of the longest-lived and most successful criminal organizations in U.S. history. According to him, The sect demonstrates a level of discipline and secrecy characteristic of the best spy agencies. Hunter suggests that the organization has a strict hierarchy with several levels of initiation. Ordinary perpetrators may not know the identities of the senior leaders, which explains why the arrested Carlos Sanchez was unable to provide significant information about the structure of the group. Perhaps at the top of the pyramid are still the descendants or even the original Hartwell sisters themselves. If Sanchez's testimony about ritual immortality is to be believed, then Isabella and Violetta may be alive and active 1.5 centuries after their first crimes. This idea seems absurd to modern rational consciousness, but too many facts point to a supernatural component in the activities of the sect. It is impossible to explain by ordinary means how a criminal organization can maintain its methods and traditions unchanged for such a long time. Doctor of Anthropology Maria Gonzalez, who studies the ritual practices of indigenous peoples of America, suggests that the Hartwell sisters may have studied ancient shamanic techniques for prolonging life. Some Indian tribes did possess knowledge of plants and rituals that could significantly slow down the aging process. Gonzalez notes that the region of Arizona and northern Mexico was the center of developed civilizations that possessed deep knowledge in the field of medicine and chemistry. Perhaps the sisters gained access to this knowledge through contact with the local population or through archaeological finds. However, the scientific community as a whole is skeptical of mystical explanations. Most experts suggest that it is a very well-organized dynastic criminal group that passes on knowledge and methods from generation to generation. Criminologist Robert Jenkins compares the Hartwell sisters sect to the Sicilian Mafia or the Japanese Yakuza. These organizations have also existed for centuries, preserving the traditions and rituals of their ancestors. The only difference is that the sect specializes in murders for religious motives, and not in ordinary criminal activity. According to Jenkins, the key to the organization's longevity is the strict selection of new members. Only women of a certain type are accepted into the sect. Beautiful, intelligent, psychopathic, and fanatically devoted to the idea. This selection guarantees a high quality of performers and a minimal risk of betrayal. Meanwhile, strange events continue to occur in Tombstone. Local residents report the appearance of new women who rent houses for short periods and lead a suspiciously secluded lifestyle. Some claim to recognize in them faces from historical photographs of the Hartwell sisters. The county sheriff, Bill Thompson, has stepped up patrols in the area, but acknowledges that his capabilities are limited. He cannot arrest women just for suspicious appearance or behavior. Concrete evidence of criminal activity is needed, and it is extremely difficult to obtain. Thompson also notes that many men continue to come to Tombstone despite the warning about possible danger. The grim fame of the city paradoxically attracts thrill-seekers and adventurers. Some of them may become victims of modern followers of the Hartwell sisters. Law enforcement officials are particularly concerned about the appearance on the internet of groups romanticizing the image of the Hartwell sisters. Some women admire their independence and cruelty, seeing them as symbols of female revenge against patriarchal society. These groups may become a source of new recruits for the sect. Feminist activist Jessica Morgan condemns such romanticization, calling the Hartwell sisters not fighters for women's rights, but ordinary serial killers. According to her, turning criminals into heroines can lead to imitative crimes and further spread the cult of violence. However, sociologist David Wilson notes that the phenomenon of the Hartwell sisters reflects the deep problems of American society in the 19th century. Women of that time were indeed limited in rights and opportunities, which could push some of them to extremes. Wilson suggests that the sect arose as a perverted form of female emancipation. Unable to achieve equality by legal means, the sisters chose the path of violence and terror. Their modern followers may be guided by similar motives, despite the changed social conditions. This theory explains the ideological component of the crimes and helps to understand why the organization continues to attract new members. For some women who feel oppressed or deprived, the sect may seem like a way to gain power and control. Psychiatrist Dr. Anna Richardson, who studies the psychology of serial killers, notes the unique characteristics of female killers. Unlike men, they rarely act alone and are often motivated not by sexual, but by material or ideological considerations. Richardson believes that the Hartwell sisters represent a rare case of organized female crime with ritual elements. Their methods of murder and treatment of victims demonstrate a high level of planning and emotional detachment. Dr. Richardson finds the collective nature of the crimes especially interesting. Usually, serial killers act alone, deriving sadistic pleasure from complete control over the victim. The sisters, however, shared this pleasure, which speaks to an unusual type of psychopathology. Perhaps they compensated for individual psychological shortcomings by complementing each other in the roles of hunter and executioner. Such cooperation could make them more effective and less vulnerable to law enforcement. Modern members of the sect probably use the same model of paired work. One plays the role of bait, charming the victim. The other prepares the murder weapon and the place for the reprisal. Such a division of labor increases the chances of success and reduces the psychological burden on each participant. What is particularly worrying to experts is the possibility of technological modernization of the sect's methods. If in the 19th century the sisters relied on primitive poisons and brute force, then their modern followers can use advanced chemicals and high-tech equipment. Toxicologist Dr. Richard Black warns of the appearance of new types of poisons that are almost impossible to detect with standard analysis. Some of these substances can mimic natural causes of death, which makes the murder almost perfect from a forensic point of view. Black also notes that modern criminals have access to information about methods of forensic medical examination and can specifically prepare to counter the investigation. This makes them much more dangerous opponents than their historical predecessors. Perhaps that is why modern disappearances are so rarely solved. Criminals have learned not to leave evidence, to choose victims who will not be searched for too actively, and to create alibis that can withstand scrutiny. Detective Carroll from Las Vegas acknowledges that the investigation of modern cases is extremely difficult due to the lack of witnesses and material evidence. Criminals act professionally, leaving no room for chance. Every murder is planned to the smallest detail and executed with surgical precision. The only hope for law enforcement remains a possible mistake by the criminals or the betrayal of one of the members of the sect. History knows many examples of when even the most closed organizations were destroyed due to internal conflicts or the carelessness of performers. However, the Hartwell sisters sect demonstrates amazing stability and discipline. In the 1.5 centuries of its existence, not a single case of betrayal or internal struggle has been registered. This speaks either of iron discipline or of the fact that unwanted members are simply eliminated. Perhaps there is its own system of justice within the sect that mercilessly punishes any display of disloyalty. Such a system could explain the organization's phenomenal resilience and the absence of informants within its ranks. Agent Hunter suspects that the cult may have adopted the operational methods of intelligence agencies, division into isolated cells, the use of code names, and regular changes of location. This makes it practically invulnerable to traditional methods of combating organized crime. The only weak link remains the human factor. Sooner or later, someone within the cult will make a mistake or want to leave the organization. This is what law enforcement is counting on as they continue their patient investigation. Meanwhile, somewhere in a remote corner of America, a beautiful stranger smiles at a lonely, wealthy man in a bar. She buys him a drink, asks about his business, and charms him with her attention. The man doesn't suspect that he may become another link in a bloody chain that stretches from the 10th century to the present day. The story of the Hartwell sisters continues. Its ending is yet to be written. Perhaps it will never be written, because some secrets are too deep and too dark to be fully revealed. In the Arizona desert, the winds still howl, carrying with them the whispers of forgotten victims and the promise of new sacrifices in the name of eternal beauty and immortal malice. And in Tombstone, where it all began, tourists still take pictures at the memorial cross on the site of the old well. They don't know that beneath their feet lie the bones of dozens of men who fell victim to the longest-running series of murders in American history, and that somewhere nearby, perhaps, another huntress lurks in the shadows, watching for her next prey among the carefree travelers.